What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morant's, Joe Johnson's, Ja Raffs, of course. We've got Jays we got for days. Josh, how you doing?
I'm ready to go today. I have things.
You're ready to go today, man.
I came
in swinging.
I had some feelings watching these games that I didn't have watching the first week of the season.
Feelings isn't like convictions about teams. Like,
yeah,
are you ready to make declarative statements about the teams that we're about to talk about? Is that what?
Yeah,
you're telling me?
That's where I'm still trying to figure out exactly how far I want to go. But I feel like the first week was kind of, they need to do that better. Or, well, you can't really take much away from a game where you're shooting on an aircraft carrier. So I don't really know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have some things.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. See, but at the same time, I'm not ready. Are you ready to make declarative statements about Kentucky?
No.
Okay. All right. I think that would be unfair to Kentucky. I think I've ponderings about Kentucky, but I'm not ready to make any declarative statements.
Yeah, no, they're more ponderings than statements. They're just actual. Now I feel like we have a narrative of sort of a starting point of where to go the rest of the season.
Yes, I would agree with that. Champions Classic, Gonzaga, Texas. We'll talk about whatever that was that happened in Austin on Wednesday night a little later in the pod, but we are going to talk about the Champions Classic first. 2 games in Indianapolis, and I'll say, Josh, I was stunned to learn that was the first overtime game of the Champions Classic, because I feel like it delivers every single year. That every year we have at least one game that's like a one possession game going into the under 4 timeout. And if you asked me to bet on whether or not there had been other overtime games at the Champions Classic, I would have wholeheartedly said yes. And I guess that just wasn't the case. I was surprised because it usually delivers, and I have memories of close games in that event.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like there's a lot of, 1 or 2 possession games with a minute left that end up being 7-point wins.
I think that's fair.
So in that regard, I probably would have guessed there was one in there too. I wasn't stunned by that just because I don't feel like we actually get a lot of games decided by 2 points. Even though they are right. There's almost
just the nature of the sport.
Right. It's just the way that the end of the game goes, that it's a lot of 5 to 9 point wins where it's a 2 possession game and it was great throughout. Yeah, because we definitely get at least one game that delivers on expectations every single year, and we certainly got that again this time around.
2 games. Kentucky and Michigan State was the early game. Duke and Kansas was the late game. Michigan State beat Kentucky 86-77, really pulling away in the second overtime. I mean, of course, obviously, if it got to the second overtime, they didn't pull away in the regulation of the first overtime. So welcome to the obvious statement of the podcast. And then Duke fell to Kansas 69-64. We'll start with the early game. Double OT. Sparty 86, Kentucky 77. Oscar Tshiebwe walked in and did the things that Oscar Tshiebwe does. 22 and 18 in 34 minutes. Did not play in the entire second overtime. Is that correct? Did he foul out at the beginning of the second overtime, or did he just not play?
I believe he fouled out at the very beginning of it, if I remember correctly.
Okay, I can't remember specifically.
Or at the very end of the first. Maybe it was the very end of the first. He was not a factor in the second overtime because he had fouled out.
Right, correct. And then on the Michigan State side, Malik Hall 20 points, Joey Hauser 23 and 8. My goodness, Joey Hauser. Joey Hauser might mess around and actually be the guy that Michigan State thought they were getting when he transferred there. Monty Sissoko, in a game where Oscar Tshiebwe was the other big, was spectacular. 16 and 8.
So good.
A whole lot to talk about here. Severe Wheeler, 16 points on 16 shots. Where do you want to start? There's a lot we could choose from. Where would you like to go first?
Yeah, so if I'm reading this play-by-play correctly, the offensive foul where he fouled out came 32 seconds from the end of the first overtime. So at the very end of overtime number 1. And that sounds right based on my memory. Yeah, I want to start with Michigan State just because they did it again. I mean, now we're going to talk about what that Gonzaga game has an entirely different meaning for both teams now after what happened in their next high-profile game. But yeah, Mady Sissoko was, and part of this conversation around this Michigan State team is there's no star, right? There's no obvious guy that's going to be your best player on the floor when you need him to be. I feel like Mady Sissoko might actually end up being able to be this team's best player. Not that he's going to lead the team in scoring, not that the numbers are going to be Oscar Tshiebwe-esque, but from an impacting the game standpoint. He's never going to be a go-to scorer. That's not what he does. But just his presence on the interior. I mean, him falling, now he needs to stay on the floor. He found a way to survive in this game. He played a long time with 4 fouls, and he and Tshiebwe both had 4, and it was Tshiebwe who got the 5th, which is a credit to him because that's when the Gonzaga game turned. It's when there was nobody to guard Drew Timme because Mady Sissoko fouled out. But if he can stay on the floor, he's so good. And of course, you can only do so much with Tshiebwe, which we'll get to him in a little bit. But that was just one of the things coming through my mind is he's already improved so much from last season that I'm getting to a point where I feel like he might be Michigan State's best player by the time we're getting to March. And then the other part of this is Michigan State played really, really, really well defensively again. And a Kentucky team that was shooting the lights out shot 28% from 3, 7 of 25. And then finally, this Michigan State team that wasn't shooting the ball well, particularly their good 3-point shooters, started hitting threes. And we talked about on our preview podcast, Joey Hauser had to be a factor. And Joey Hauser went out there and for the first at least 30 minutes of the game was big time and kept knocking down these threes. Malik Hall hit a couple threes. That wasn't happening earlier this season. And so, Tyson Walker got going, who's a 40-plus % three-point shooter from last season. So finally, this team that actually shot the ball really well started shooting the ball pretty well. They finished at 36%. And the turnovers are still an issue. But just from a fundamental standpoint of giving yourself a chance to win by playing defense, by guarding the 3-point line, by being able to create enough offensively, by being able to hit 3-pointers, and just generally being difficult to play against. They have now proven it twice. This is way better than I thought this Michigan State team would be at this point. So that was my first big thing. And then you get to the Kentucky side of this, which is, I think we're going to have some differing viewpoints based on our text messages, but the reality of the situation is Cason Wallace, Xavier Wheeler, and Oscar Tshiebwe had 52 of your 77 points, and that is not a recipe for success.
No, it is not. There was a lot to unpack there. But I mean, yeah, I'm way more interested in talking about Kentucky because I have firm beliefs that I like the Kentucky team I saw on the floor the first 2 games more than the Kentucky team I saw in this game, even though Oscar Tshiebwe was on the floor. I'm not sure that Mady Sissoko being Michigan State's best player is a good thing for Michigan State.
I'm not sure either.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
He certainly was. I like the word impactful there. I think I'm not sure what other word to use.
Yeah, and that's
maybe
I was just
I would
kind of
be
using those two interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like it's more than important. So the only other word out there is best or impactful. Yeah, and I'm right there with you. I don't know that bodes well for their hopes of making a deep NCAA tournament run. I just think it might be the position we get into because he's improved so much and he means so much from a defensive standpoint, a rebounding standpoint, all that.
I'm not ready to jump to conclusions on Michigan State's ability to score the basketball enough to win a ton of Big Ten games or win more than 2 games in the NCAA tournament. Because it wasn't like it was spectacular the first couple games, right?
They were bad offensively.
I mean, 73 against Northern Arizona is not exactly impressive. I mean, the defense has certainly been good, and other than Oscar Tshiebwe, they were pretty effective all night. But when shots are going down like that, and I guess I'll put it that way, is that I wasn't even sure Michigan State could beat the top teams in the sport when they did shoot well. And what we've learned the last couple days is that they have the defense to hang with anybody on any given night. And then when they have pretty good nights Malik Hall and Joey Hauser were a combined 15 of 27 from the floor. When you have nights like, and Sissoko also shot 50% from the field. Really, the only reason they only shot 40% was because AJ Hoggard and Tyson Walker, who had a big shouts to Tyson Walker, were 5 of 20 combined, right? Apart from them, and pretty much everybody was efficient. I'm if they can continue to get consistent performances from their wings, from their bigger wings, then I'm much more in. But I would like to see them once again play a top team and shoot it well, or just get some more subject matter to look at before jumping to any further conclusions. But they looked good, and to be honest with you, I'm already like, if you gave me the over under 1 million, I would take the over on the number of times we're going to hear, man, Tom Izzo really loves this team, and man, I really don't want to play Sparty in March.
Yep.
Because and as cliche and as cookie cutter as it's gotten, this is certainly the type of team that that Tom Izzo seems to get to overachieve throughout the season. So I certainly wouldn't bet on this being more of the norm in terms of the type of performance they gave rather than the exception.
And I mentioned this after Gonzaga, but they don't usually look like this right away, which is really, that's the only part of this that I find exceptionally interesting from a Michigan State standpoint. Because the Kentucky side of this is much more interesting. I'm in agreement with you there. It's just, okay, so how much improvement can there be from this team? Because if you get typical Michigan State improvement, you are really onto something if this is the starting point. Now, the flip side to that is, where is that improvement coming from? Because you're still limited offensively. You're already elite defensively, the way they've played, at least so far. So what exactly are you getting a lot better at? But if they can find a way to elevate things offensively, then it gets right. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with. So that's the one thing I'm interested in. On the Kentucky side of things is where I have a lot more questions and general wonderingments.
Oh, and the only other thing I want to say again with Michigan State is that they got to take better care of the basketball.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's
just always a thing.
Yeah, I mean, like, their backcourt having 8 turnovers combined, and then the rest of their starting lineup adding 8 more. I need you to be better than that, and I would also love for somebody to come on as a consistent bench performer for them at some point. 9 total points, and only Jaden Atkins played more than 9 minutes off the bench.
Yeah,
I mean, he played 27. He played, borderline. I mean, it's not as close to starters minutes as it might look when you played 50 minutes in the game, but it seems like depth among the top teams is something that I'm going to be looking at this year, because it doesn't seem like a ton of them have all that much. North Carolina doesn't seem to have any. Michigan State at least hasn't really shown it yet. Kentucky will probably be fine. I mean, they had a ton of bench points in this game because Sheboy and Wheeler came off the bench, but those are the only two kind of, let's keep an eye on those things for Michigan State. But yes, let's talk Kentucky. Just talk to me. What do you want to talk about first?
Well, I want to start by saying that Oscar Sheboy led all players in plus minus at 12, and that has to count for something. I get where you're coming from with this whole building an offense around him limits what this Kentucky team can do and may end up being to their detriment. And I generally buy that. I feel like so I wanted to recognize that part of it first, that they, you're looking at the rest of these guys. I mean, his replacement Lance Ware was minus 12. CJ Frederick was minus 14. Casey Wallace was minus 4. Topping and Livingston were minus 1. Antonio Reeves was plus 6, but he was also 1 of 7 from the floor, so it wasn't like that was because of the impact he had. The difference was when Sheboy was on the floor is when Kentucky was able to kind of regain control of this game, which they had by and large for most of it, because Michigan State had to come from behind twice to force overtime and force a second overtime. So it's got to count for something. And he just came into the game, and I just kind of forgot how dominant he is. Because all you looked up and he played 8 minutes. He's got 7 points and 4 rebounds, and he was outstanding defensively. He's a monster. What I feel like the interesting part of this, and I'll let you respond to this part and kind of elaborate on your views about this. Can you get to a point where you can maximize the things Tshiebwe does so well, specifically rebounding and, pick and rolls and those kind of things, without force feeding him the ball, so that you can get more of the transition game, you can get more from all of your other perimeter players? Because it's not like he's Drew Timme with his footwork, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like and the best example I can think of is Joel Embiid, where he's going to face you up, right? He's not a polished offensive player. Now, he certainly can get his own buckets, and if you let
hand it to him in the same 3-foot circle on the floor.
Exactly, right. And he did hit one jumper in this game. If he buries you inside, you're done for, because nobody is going to be able to move him off of that space. But do you have to force feed that? Do you have to make that the primary part of your offense? Or can you find a way to – he's going to get you 16 points a game just from being Oscar Tshiebwe without having to shoot the ball 17 times like he did in this game. From rebounding, from just being around the rim all the time, because you've got 2 guards that can break down defenses in Wheeler and Wallace. That's kind of where I don't know the answer to that, whether they can find that balance. But to me, that's what this has to be for Kentucky to reach its potential, is you got to find a way to not build it all the way around Tshiebwe and kind of let him do what he does best without hampering everybody else.
And because he is a one-dimensional big man, there's no correct answer. The question you just asked, there's no answer to that question. There's just not. If there was, we would have seen it last year. If there was, they wouldn't look so lost in the second overtime. That team, they couldn't get a good shot, and they got good shots for 80 straight minutes in their first 2 games. And I understand that it's Michigan State and not Howard and Duquesne. I get it.
Yeah.
I'm not stupid. But they looked lost offensively.
So that's a point in the Tshiebwe column, right?
Because they spent the whole game handing the ball to Tshiebwe and saying, let me go stand in a corner while this big man who missed his era by 30 years can be the most important player on the floor.
I see what you're saying.
When was the last time a college basketball team was truly one of the best in the country and their big guy was the end-all, be-all of their team?
The first one that comes to mind is Tyler Hansbrough.
15 years ago.
Right.
Joakim Noah, 15 years ago. Al Horford, 15 years ago. My point is, I will always, and this has become part of my brand, so Kentucky can go on to win the national championship and Tshiebwe can average 30 and 20, and I will still stand where I stand, that I will take, straight up, I'll take the version of the Kentucky team I had the first 2 games over this one. Straight up. Because I'm much more interested in when Tshiebwe is not on the floor, they're unbelievably athletic and switchable and long, and Tshiebwe can't switch. And I should stop because I can't say anything without of course Tshiebwe is awesome, and if he plays like that, he's going to be a first-team All-American. And the numbers are probably going to look better with him on the floor than off it. But I just think that if he was never on the floor, that the numbers would be better, because now we've completely transitioned to let's make sure that Oscar Tshiebwe is the focal point of everything. And we've transitioned to where we were last year, which is a 5'9" guard who's inefficient on most nights, even though he's a good passer. 6 of 16. Your 5'9" guard taking 16 shots to get 16 points is not it, with all due respect to Severe Wheeler. And if it was those 2 guys combined for 38. If the optimization is there, then you should have won the basketball game. I mean, I just, and maybe it just will take a little while, but we went from CJ Frederick and AJ Reeves making everything to being 3 of 14 combined.
Right.
You know why? Because they don't get to move. The offense is, hey, you stand over here, you stand over here. We'll let Sheboy stand in the middle by himself, and either he scores or, I mean, it's not like he's, like you said, it's not like the only way he's putting pressure on the defense is because he's so freaking massive. It's because you got to worry so much about if you've got anybody on your team that can even kind of bother him in the post. Other than that, he's not doing anything. I don't think Kentucky is nearly as versatile and nearly as dangerous with Sheboy on the floor. I don't think they're nearly as hard to guard. And the only reason that they're still thank the Lord, Sheboy is the most dominant college basketball player from just a physical perspective we've seen in a while. I mean, I guess Zion, but like, you get my point. He kind of just does whatever he wants to do. But unfortunately, what he does is stand on the block. And he's not really in pick and rolls. Not really. It's really I mean, Wheeler averages 9 assists a game because he throws it to Sheboy in the post, and Sheboy just kind of jumps over him.
Right.
And so, and I know that I'm silly, and I know everything in Tuesday's game suggests that they're better with him on the floor than off. But I also understand the things that every basketball team that has won a national championship in the last 5 years has done. And when Sheboy's on the floor, Kentucky doesn't do those things. They just don't.
Yeah, and I think there's to me, it's a question rather than a definitive. I think you've already reached your conclusion on it about what you're going to think about this team heading into March in terms of whether they are in a position to win a national championship the way they're constructed.
Because I fundamentally believe that the question you're posing is impossible with the type of player Sheboy is. Yes.
Right. And that's where I want to see a little we're going to get another good test here in just a matter of days with Gonzaga. I want to see, because the flip side to that and the counter is, okay, this was game 1 with Sheboy, so CJ Frederick and Antonio Reeves have never played with him before. So I want to give it a little bit of time to see if they can strike a better balance. Because the one thing where I feel like it is possible is you don't actually have to generate offense for Sheboy, right? He just kind of does it himself by being him. So you don't have to, I'm not convinced you have to force feed him the ball. I'm also not convinced Kentucky's going to end up getting to that point where they do find a way to balance all of this. So I'm a wait and see on that. But I am with you that this is a legitimate question that needs to be highlighted now. And I do think that overall, that game was a check in your column rather than a check in the Oscar Sheboy column, even though some of the numbers suggest they are better with him on the floor. I think I'm with you that there's a bigger story. I just don't know exactly what that story is yet. Is there anything else you want to add to that? Because there's one other thing I want to mention.
Not especially. No.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The other thing I just wanted to address was situationally. On 2 different occasions, Kentucky should have probably won this game and fell apart. Now, that was a terrific out-of-bounds play Michigan State ran the second time around to throw the ball.
The second one or the first
the second
one? The stack on the baseline was one I've been running since I was 7 years old.
Yes,
that was bad defense.
No.
Okay.
The other one where they threw the ball, I think Walker threw it to Hogard and then basically ran a fly route, and Hogard just hit him at half court, and all of a sudden it was a 3-on-2 or 4-on-3 or something, and Malik Hall and Walker passed it to Malik Hall. Yeah. That was a very well-designed play by Tom Izzo. The first one was just...
The first one was a failure of keeping yourself between your man and the basket.
And the ball, right.
I mean, was it Toppin who got the dunk? Was it Toppin who ended up with it? Sorry, no. I'm sorry.
Malik Hall had both of them.
Sorry. Malika.
Yeah.
Right. I
yeah.
mean, the guy didn't move until it was like, okay, and then at the very end of this play, Malik, you're going to take 2 steps forward.
Right. And I'm not even convinced that was actually what he was supposed to do. It almost looked to me like he just decided, oh, there's nobody there, so I'm just going to go to the basket. Yeah. And that's the point I wanted to make was, and I don't know what happened because Sheboy was going to front him basically, right? Sheboy went over the top, and clearly either somebody else was supposed to be guarding the basket or that wasn't supposed to happen, and Sheboy read it wrong. I don't know. But that kind of stuff has to get cleaned up too if Kentucky's going to be a national title contender. Because even with all of the criticism you can throw at Kentucky in this game, they still should have won.
Mm-hmm.
Probably twice before Sheboy fouled out. And they didn't do the little things, and it's not like, I mean, yes, Tyson Walker hit a couple big shots. Tyson Walker also missed a couple very makeable shots he was frustrated with himself with. That could have ended this game. You know, he got good looks and they just didn't go in. That should have been that. But Michigan State didn't even have to work for these huge baskets to tie the game with, 20 seconds or less remaining. They were just gifted them, basically. Mm. And that was the other part of this for me I wanted to mention.
That's fair. Yeah, I don't understand I don't really care what Malik Hall does. And I guess the whole not giving him a wide open 3-pointer, I guess at the end of the day, you giving up a dunk is unfortunate, but the one thing you really can't give up is a wide open 3-pointer, which I guess, but
in a 2-point game?
Well, yeah, but you just don't want to lose the game on that shot.
Sure. See, I would argue if they want to go take a shot that's a win or that's going to determine the outcome of the game, okay, if it's a wide open one, maybe. But to me, you got to actually make them make a shot instead of taking the risk that you're gifting them a tie game.
Sure, but it's also but also at the same time, if they get a dunk, the worst thing that can happen is overtime.
Sure.
And of course you don't want to do either, but
right, it's a different calculus than if you're up 3 or you're up 1.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and neither when you're up to you just have to play defense
Right. Exactly. That's kind of where I'm coming from. Right. You got to do something to make the other team actually earn those points. And
there's a difference between the play working and you just not playing defense.
Exactly.
I mean, they got 2 wide open dunks.
Right.
Do better.
Right. Definitely.
I the only other thing I'll say is, I mean, and I wholeheartedly mean this, that if Severe Wheeler's usage rate is higher at the end of this season than Cason Wallace's, John Calipari has failed as a coach, because Cason Wallace is clearly the best guard on this basketball team. And he was 5 of 10. He had 14 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, 8 steals.
He was really good.
And Severe Wheeler is still the guy with the ball taking contested shots late in the game,
which is not what he does anyways.
So I don't, and I get that, I get that he's the veteran, and I get that he was here last year, and I get all of that. But at some point, there's no way Calipari's in practice actually thinking that Severe Wheeler is as good as Cason Wallace. There's no way. I find that really, really hard. Because it seems pretty obvious in game, yes? That at least Wallace is more all over the place than Wheeler is.
At least so far.
Right.
And, Wheeler's starting to work his way back from but certainly.
So why are you taking 16 shots if you're still working your way back? That's the only other thing I'll say. It's every time Kentucky plays, I'm wow, that dude is a huge guard. He's big, he's physical, he's all over the place. And he's 2 of 5 from the 3-point line. It's not like he's a one-dimensional guy that, he's shooting the ball pretty well as, also.
Yep.
And so if I'm just going to lose my mind if Wheeler has a higher usage rate, and it's probably going to happen, but Wallace is far and away the best guard on this team. And I hope that at the end of the season, at the very least, the usage rates reflect that, which makes it interesting what Wheeler's place on this team would be if it actually, and maybe that's part of it, because a 5'9" guard who isn't only on the ball and isn't like a fantastic 3-point shooter is like, there are questions about where, and isn't a defender because he's 5'9", right? All of these things, all of these questions are, okay, so where does he end up? So that's probably part of it, but that's the only other thing I had.
I wholeheartedly subscribe to that. And again, Wheeler's not a scorer. That's not what he does. I think there's a way. I think there's a way to still play both of them because of what Wallace gives you defensively, and I still kind of want the ball in Wheeler's hands because of his passing ability. To me, that's a different conversation than who ends up taking shots. I think those are two different things, and Casey Wallace should.
But it wasn't two different things in this game.
In this game, right? Exactly, and that's where I'm right there with you. That needs to change because Casey Wallace needs to be taking more shots. Yeah, 100%.
I've also decided that I'm really going to look and see, and he was good at Georgia, but like I might have to go to intently watch 4 Kentucky games in a row and see how many of his assists through those 4 games are just pass it to Oscar Tshiebwe.
Yeah, sure.
That's not really a knock. I mean, if you're making the pass, like if you're being a point guard, it's about making the right pass, and when you're playing for Kentucky and Tshiebwe's on the floor, a lot of times making the right pass is throwing it to him in the block. So that's not a knock. I'm just curious. But Sparty 86-77 double overtime in the early game. The late game, Duke Blue Devils, Kansas Jayhawks 69-64 for Kansas. Let's see, what do you need to know? Jeremy Roach 16 points, only 1 assist. Duke had 8 assists on 24 made shots. Kyle Filipowski 17 and 14 on 6 of 18 shooting. Duke was just 35% from the field, 3 of 21 from the 3-point line. The Jayhawks, we can talk about Jalen Wilson in a second. I'm gonna have a trivia time for you here in a second. He had 25, 11, and 5. Was 0 of 7 from the 3-point line, but took 26 shots. Kevin McCullough 12, 6, and 2. Grady Dick 14 points. And that's just about all he did. He had like a rebound and a steal, and that was literally the only other contributions to the stat sheet. And then another top 10 team that has literally no bench presence whatsoever, at least not in this particular game. They had 4 points combined. And you remember when Joseph Yusefu was supposed to be like one of the guys for Kansas?
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
5 points, 5 minutes, 0-4 from the field, 0 points. Just very much not the tenure at Kansas I was expecting him to have when we were talking about him at the beginning of last season. But 69-64, the Jayhawks win now 3-0 without Bill Self, and I don't know who they play next, but I'm guessing it's somebody who's not very good. Yes, it's Southern Utah, and unless something very strange happens at Fog Allen against Southern Utah, the Bill Selfless Kansas Jayhawks will probably go 4-0 without Bill Self. What say you about this 5-point? Or do you want the trivia time first, or do you want to give your opening thoughts?
Let's do trivia time.
Okay. Actually, give your opening thoughts. I have to go back to the stats page. I want to make sure I have it right. And I'm pretty sure I know what the stat is, but I want to make sure. So give me your opening thoughts first.
I thought I was going to look really smart when Duke took control of this game there for a little bit in the second half, because they're just bigger and really started to impose their will. But Kansas just hung in there. And the thing that I kind of have a couple big takeaways from this game, and then a couple other things I want to discuss quickly. Duke basically looked like I thought Duke was going to look like. The thing I underestimated that is fascinating about this Kansas team is it is the complete opposite of what you associate with really good Bill Self teams, right? They are not playing through a big guy.
Mm-mm.
They are not playing through a pick and roll point guard. They are playing through a wing, and they don't have a big guy.
Yeah. And just in general, an elite wing group. Like they probably have the best wing group in the country.
Right.
At least one of them.
Yeah. Which makes them very difficult to deal with, because you have all of these 6'8" dudes out there who can, some of them at least, can switch. You know, KJ Adams plays much bigger than he is. Jalen Wilson is a rebounding machine. And so they can expose some things, and they're so difficult to guard because you just don't really know where it's coming from, and they all can Most of them can shoot. And that was the part of this that I just look at this Kansas team and I see so many flaws, but that was the part I underestimated. It's why they won this game. That and the fact DeJuan Harris is the closest thing I'm ready to crown. Are you ready for this? This is a big moment.
Are you about to say Monte Morris?
He is the closest thing I've seen to Monte Morris since Monte Morris left college basketball. Yes.
Interesting. I don't think you're giving Monte Morris enough credit, but
yeah,
as long as we're being very clear that we're like saying he's like 71% of the way to Monte Morris.
Yes.
Maybe 66, maybe 2/3.
Yes.
Maybe.
No, nobody is ever matching Monte Morris.
Okay. Right.
I just mean, and Monte
was, would have gone 10-1 assist to turnover ratio and had 17 points on 6 of 9 shooting.
Right. My point is, what I loved about Monte Morris is the same thing DeJuan Harris gives you, which is the rare point guard that can actually have their ball in the ball in their hands all the time without turning it over. And actually, the stats might not be great, but he makes the right decision every single time. He is always under control. He knows exactly what he wants to do. He is a floor general. He actually runs an offense. And you look at that and you contrast it to Duke with all of those, the charges, the out of control plays. That's why Kansas jumped out to a lead in this game, is Duke was just out of control and not moving the ball. And then once they started to sort of pull things together, they got back into the game. And then they dominated the glass and the free throw line like they're supposed to. But that was the other part of this for me, is Kansas looked like a team with a bunch of guys who have been there before, because they're a team with at least some guys who have been there before.
I mean, and even if they haven't been there before for Kansas, I mean, like DeJuan Harris and Jalen Wilson, they have been there before.
Right, exactly.
And Kevin McCullough Jr. maybe hasn't been there for Kansas, but he has been there before.
Mm-hmm. So the question then becomes, similar to Michigan State, how much better can they get? Because this is what you've got, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas Duke is not at full strength. Duke has a bunch of guys who are playing their third game of college basketball, who are new to the program, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I came away even more optimistic about Duke's ceiling, but also appreciating that Kansas is awfully good again.
I'm a little disappointed that Duke's 7-footers were only a combined 8 of 21 in this game. Mm-hmm. Like that just, and I understand Filipowski is much more interested in proving to the NBA that he's a stretch big rather than just like being the biggest guy on the floor. And Derek Lively, only 21 minutes, 2 of 3, 5 rebounds. I mean, like he looks like a guy who's recovering from, injury and just still getting into the swing of things. Right. But like, if you're John Shire, you just need to tell Phil about, like, dude, you are the biggest guy on the floor. We can get you 3-pointers and pick and pops at a different time. I need you to go stand on the block because you're 7 feet tall and they don't really have anybody else who's that tall. Right. They won the rebounding battle. They got 21 offensive rebounds. Like there were things that made it clear. I mean, Derek Lively had 4 offensive rebounds. That made it clear that they were way bigger than Kansas. I just didn't feel that in the most important parts of the stat sheet. And that's not surprising because, Filipowski, we talked about in preseason, like, can he and Lively play together? Because Lively's a much more like an around the rim, like a dive to the rim, catch a lob kind of guy. And Filipowski wants to hang out on the 3-point line, which is fine. I just feel like I would have loved to see a little bit of a pivot from John Shire in terms of just, hey, listen, I promise you by the time the season's over, scouts are going to know that you can shoot the basketball. I swear to you.
And he's playing as a 4. He's going to get some of those opportunities naturally.
Right.
But also there also comes a time when you have a bunch of 6'8" guys who are trying to guard 2 7-footers that, you just need to put them on both blocks and say, have fun.
Right. Exactly. So I wasn't surprised by that. I was just a little disappointed because then, that was the thing that was supposed to be Duke's advantage. Right. And in some ways it was, but in not always. And then when you try to go up with the wings that Kansas has, then like Duke, especially without Dariq Whitehead, who they desperately need from an on-ball shot creator perspective. When you try to go toe-to-toe with those Kansas Wings, then you might just run out of gas at some point.
Yeah, the entire sort of control of the game standpoint was really disappointing from a Duke perspective for me. For sort of the reasons you were just talking about, right? Where is the ball going? How is this offense getting set? Like I said, they were just out of control and made some really poor passes at times. They were just not collected the way Kansas is, because DeJuan Harris is there and because Jalen Wilson is that dude. You know, he's been around the block as well, obviously.
And sorry, but just to that point, 18 turnovers, 8 assists. Yep. I'm ready for somebody to come back. So I would like Dariq Whitehead to come back for lots of reasons, but so that Jeremy Roach doesn't have to shoot 17 times is certainly one of them. But yeah, they looked like a team that was not the team that just won a national championship. And 3 of those starters on that Kansas Jayhawks team are veteran college basketball guys.
Yeah. Couple things real quick. I really like Tyrese Proctor.
Yeah.
I think he's gonna become one of my favorite players in the country by the end of this season. He's not there yet, and obviously he's super young where he's still trying to figure this all out. Sure. If he sticks around for a second year though, he's got All-American. He's got either 1 and done or All-American written all over him, depending on how this all plays out. I really like his game and kind of what he was able to do. The second one, and I said in the preview this idea that Duke's freshmen are just going to kind of cancel Grady Dick out, which to a certain extent happened because there are just so many Duke freshmen. His finishing ability, my goodness. Have you ever, I can't think of another player who is known as a shooter first and foremost, and he showed it in this game. He isn't, and the other part of this is too, right? He's a guy who's just ready to play at the next level, whatever that next level is, because he doesn't have to change anything. He's just going to stand there and shoot and be 6'8" and taller than the guys guarding him because that's what he does, right? His role is the exact same as it was in high school, and it's going to be his role in the NBA. So the idea
but he can also already score at all 3 levels.
Right.
Which is impressive.
Right. So that was kind of my thought about him coming in is I wasn't surprised he started really well because a lot of his stuff, a lot of what he's supposed to be good at just translates because he's doing the exact same things, right? He doesn't have the responsibility of trying to run an offense and all that. But then he came out and every time, right, it was, back cuts or whatever. I've never seen a player who is that good of a shooter and known as a shooter that's not, 5'10" finish like that. I have two comps that came to mind that I don't associate with that part of it. Can you think of anybody that has that
in college specifically
or NBA, I guess? I was thinking more college, but
I mean, I haven't thought a ton about it,
sure.
So I don't have. So I'll let you. How about this? I'll let you tell me what you have in your mind, and I'll tell you if you're right. There we go.
Okay, because I've never seen somebody that is that much of a shooter that whenever they get around the basket, they're just reverse layups, falling down. The touch, he was incredible with that. The 2 names that came to. Oh, go ahead.
So the last thing I'll say before you tell us that is. Like, I feel like there are some guys who have that and don't realize they have it just because they don't want to go to the front of the rim, right?
Sure.
I mean, a guy who's a great 3-point shooter having touch, that's not surprising, right? But his willingness and creativity around the rim, that's what's impressive.
And it's not like he's a mind-blowing athlete, right? It's not that it's...
He's just physically gifted from his body is just like 6'8".
Coordination.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the 2 names that came to mind, I'll do the one I feel worse about first, and then get to the one that I think is a little bit closer. Okay. The first one that I kind of came up with as a secondary option is Sam Hauser.
Okay.
But Sam Hauser's not that kind of finisher.
No.
But just from this idea of, right, he could put the ball on the floor a little bit. He could pump fake from the 3-point line and step into the mid-range jumper. He could cut a little bit, those kind of things.
Yeah, he's definitely I guess the word's boxier, robotic tight. Like I feel like he was more deliberate. Maybe deliberate's the word. But I don't hate that. No.
Then the other one I thought of was Doug McDermott. Now again, Doug McDermott wasn't finishing that way, but the idea of he can shoot the ball, he can post you up because of his size. He had a multi-dimensional game where it wasn't just, and this was really what I was going for, right? It wasn't just the 3-point shooting. He was a great 3-point shooter, but he was also a much more dangerous player than just doing that. So he could still get you baskets at the rim in the NBA. That was never going to be who he was as an NBA player, but he wasn't exclusively a guy who has to stand there and shoot 3-pointers.
Yeah.
Those were the only two things I thought came somewhat close to what I saw, because I was floored. Every layup he took, none of them were easy, and they all went in.
Mm-hmm. And with 7-footers on the floor, nonetheless. Like, it's not like it was little itty bitty people, right? They only had two block shots in the game. Duke did. Filipowski had one, and Lively had one. Are you ready for your trivia time?
Yeah.
And this is my last big point from this game. Jalen Wilson took 26 shots in this game. Prior to Tuesday night, what was the most shots he had taken in a college basketball game?
I'll say 17.
That's correct.
Oh,
that's exactly right. He took 17 earlier this season against North Dakota State, and then on, how about this? On his second most, he took 16 3 different times. And December 1st, 2020, he was 8 of 16 from the field. That was that 23 and 10 game he had. Do you remember that?
Yep.
So he took 9 more shots in this game than he ever has in a college basketball game before. And I have a couple things to say about this. 11 of 26 is fine. It's not great. 0 of 7 from the 3-point line is obviously atrocious. But I don't especially care about that for a couple reasons.
No.
The first thing is that we needed Jalen Wilson to be the best version of this team is Jalen Wilson being the guy, right?
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And the other part of being the guy is taking shots, even when they're not always going down. Like, sometimes you're just going to have nights where, and especially in the night, like, neither team was great in this game on the offensive side of the ball. Neither team shot better than 50%, and the teams combined were 6 of 40 from the 3-point line. But his willingness to just take shots and take shots and take shots and take shots is an underrated. It's a little like learning as a golfer to, like, when you're 4 under through 7 holes, to like keep the pedal down and try to go and shoot 61, right? There are plenty of guys that are capable of shooting 61 that don't, because they get uncomfortable when they're 7 under through 12. And then they're like, oh, I'm just like guarding the score I have and not trying to make it better. It's a little like that, being comfortable with taking so many shots. He ended up with 25, 11, and 5. He was really good, right? He wasn't great, and it wasn't like he just made everything, so that's why he had 25 points. And taking that many shots in a game like this, I thought was noteworthy, because that's a lot of shots for anybody, and a lot of shots for him as a guy who had never taken more than 17 in a game. If he's going to be right, and you'd love for him to be a little bit more productive, right? And I don't want him to go. This isn't about me wanting him to go 11 of 26 every game, but his willingness to do that, because if he's willing to do that, even when he's not shooting spectacularly, he's also going to be willing to be the guy late in an NCAA tournament game where you can hand the ball to him, and he's going to at least be willing to try and go make a play. And he had 5 assists as well, other than DeJuan Harris. That was second on the team. All of these things work into the idea of he at least seems up to the task of being the guy. And that's the first step of maybe he's just not that good of a guy. That could happen. But him taking 26 shots tells me that he is up for the idea of being the guy on this team, which is, if it works, is dangerous for the rest of the country.
Yep. And it's the best, like you said, it's the best version of this team. You would much rather have the guy who shoots too much than the guy who's not willing to take those shots and sort of shies away. Jalen Wilson seems very comfortable carrying this burden. Maybe it comes back to haunt him that he gets a little too comfortable. We're going to have to wait and see. The other thing I will say about this is he's too good of a shooter for that to be a concern from the 3-point line.
Sure.
He's not a great shooter, but that's going to even itself out, and he's going to be just fine from that. He had a bad shooting game and still found a way to make a very good impact. And like to your point, wasn't fazed by it. I would much rather have that situation than the opposite 3 games into the season.
100%. All right, let's move on to Gonzaga and Texas. We've been here for a while, so we'll try to move relatively quickly through this. But Texas 93, Gonzaga 74. Don't freaking mess with Texas. Apparently, Tyrese Hunter is the best offensive player in the country. I don't know when that happens. And the best shooter in the country. And I like, with all due respect, I need a performance enhancing drugs test on him. With all due respect, 26 points. I mean, like, it was like he and Marcus Carr switched roles. Like, he had 26 and only 2 assists, and Marcus Carr had 16 and 7 assists and had only 1 turnover. And Tyrese Hunter had 2 turnovers and 2 assists. I don't know what in the world happened, but led by those 2 guys, Texas 51% from the floor, and they straight up embarrassed. And they were straight up better than Gonzaga for 40 minutes. We'll put it that way. Drew Timme had 18 and 9 on 7 of 10 shooting. Doesn't matter who they're playing. Nobody can stop him from shooting 70% from the floor. But that was the highlight for Gonzaga. And we can kind of go from there. But what say you about whatever that was that happened in Austin on Wednesday night?
Yeah, my first takeaway was, well, this appears to be working for Texas. As in,
it's an astute observation, Mr. Doran.
Right, I know, I'm just blowing your mind here. We talked about this idea that you put Tyrese Hunter next to Marcus Carr to let Marcus Carr play off the ball. You bring back Dylan DeSue as your interior presence, because that was a piece that was missing last season that was supposed to be there. And it just makes a lot more sense. And I mean, they were outstanding. Yeah, when Tyrese Hunter became that good of a 3-point shooter, they kept saying during the broadcast he put a lot of work on that over the offseason. I don't doubt that. That still might be the best shooting performance he's going to have in his basketball career.
And Gonzaga's perimeter defense was atrocious in this basketball game, but it's not like all of them were wide open.
No.
Like, there were some, I was like, what in the world is Tyrese? Like,
yes.
There were a couple of times, and because I'm still learning what it looks like to see Tyrese Hunter in a Texas uniform. Does that make sense? Like, I'm still learning. So there were a couple of times I was like, oh my gosh, who was that? And it was just freaking Tyrese Hunter. I was like, wait, what are you doing? I thought you were the facilitator and the guy that was going to unlock Marcus Carr. Apparently not. I mean, Carr was great also in this game, but like 26 and 26 minutes. You only played 26 minutes in this game.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened.
This was
test, I'm telling you.
This was everything he did in that NCAA tournament game, except for he was lethally efficient.
Yeah.
Which is a terrifying thought. So the other part of this, before we get into my big Gonzaga concern, is, that Final Four pick you made looks really, really smart. I am sold. I don't need to see anything else.
Of course, my national championship pick doesn't look all that smart right now. But so it's a give and a take. But we'll hold on to what we can.
That's a team that can win the Big 12. I'm not convinced they're going to. I want to see more of them because this is obviously their first real test. But all of it's the opposite from last season. Everything that they could be, they have a real chance of actually getting to, as opposed to every sort of the worst case scenario happening. It was, and having Dylan DeSue back made a huge difference. Was able to limit Drew Timme some. Their freshmen chipped in here or there. My guy Brock Cunningham stole the ball from Drew Timme and was guarding Drew Timme. It was just a glorious moment for college basketball.
You gotta love Brock Cunningham.
Gotta love Brock Cunningham. They were, and of course they're going to be one of the best, if not the best defensive team in the country, one of the top 5. and you get that kind of shooting and that kind of playmaking and that kind of ball movement, they were outstanding.
Man, I totally forgot what I was going to say. The thing I was going to, they were outstanding. And the Moody Center, the star of the show.
Yep.
Like Tyrese Hunter had 26 on 9 of 14 shooting. And my biggest takeaway still might be that the Moody Center looks lit. That place looks, and I saw a picture from above the stands, basically, like in the concourse. Like, it's only one bowl. It's a super cool state, and they have they have the screens that I can't remember which building they referred to in terms of basically these massive screens on the wall that are supposed to keep noise in. It looks fun, and to the point that you made about them maybe winning the Big 12, I don't there's nobody that's going into that building that I'm betting on them to beat Texas in that building. That place looks impossible to play in. That place looks impossible to play in.
Yep.
So sorry to interrupt, but I was impressed by the Moody Center. Shouts to the Moody Center.
That's really my takeaway for Texas is, to me, this looks sustainable. I have no question. Now, they're not going to do that every single game. And Tyrese Hunter is not going to do that every single game. But I don't need to see anything.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't need to see anything more to believe, that's easily a top 10 team in the country. That's a national title contender.
Yeah. And it's not like they did that and then they won by 6. Right? They could have been, instead of shooting the way that they did, could have shot, especially those two guards could have shot a little worse and they still would have won by 11. It wasn't like they narrowly escaped and those guys shot that well.
And Gonzaga shot 47% from 3, 9 and 19.
Yeah.
And they weren't close.
No, they were not. All right, let's talk about Gonzaga. What's your big thing?
Okay.
I have two big things, and I'm assuming what you're going to say is going to be one of them, but I've got two things. So please tell me what your big thing is.
This was my big sort of theme from all of these games. They don't have a floor general. Hunter Salas, Nolan Hickman, at least at this point, not facilitators. This is not about assists. This is about making decisions with the ball in your hands to put your team in the best position every single time down the floor. Mm-hmm. They're just not that guy. Malachi Smith isn't that guy. Rasir Bolton's not that guy. Andrew Nembhard, Jalen Suggs were those guys.
You hit it on the head on both ends of the floor, because those two guys are also interested in competing on the defensive end the way that Nembhard is already a guy in the NBA for the Pacers that is guarding 1 through 3, right? He's he's the guy to fill in the starting lineup when somebody is injured.
Which was, we nailed that. We said from the minute he got drafted, that's a 10-year NBA guy. Never going to be great, but he's always going to have a role.
Right. He competes, and then Jalen Suggs is an unbelievable just competitor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I hate when people are like, I just love his competitive nature. Yeah, shut up. These are professional athletes. All of them are competitive. But Jalen Suggs really seemed to take pride in a lot of things on both ends of the floor. And and you've hit the nail on the head here on both ends of the floor, especially offensively, but also on the defensive end, because just in general, they were horrible defensively in this game. There were lots of, and Texas was only 13 of 33, only 13 of 33. That's still 40% as a team, just short of it. But I felt like they could have been 17 of 33, and I wouldn't have been all that surprised.
Yeah. It just doesn't matter that much, or I guess I shouldn't say that. It only matters to a certain extent, how gifted everybody else on your team is if you're not setting them up for success every possession. And especially a guy like Drew Timme, who, can handle the ball a little bit, but you're not running an offense through him the way the Nuggets do for Nikola Jokic.
Mm-hmm.
He's not that kind of passer. He's not that kind. He doesn't have that kind of vision. He doesn't have that kind of ball handling ability. You've got to have somebody that puts you in a good position every single possession. And certainly part of this is the fact you were playing one of the best defenses in the country. And, these guys are 3 games into having this kind of responsibility. I am not giving up on Gonzaga looking like the best team in the country heading into the NCAA tournament. I'm not willing to back down on that because they have so far to go based on what we've seen these first two games.
Mm-hmm.
And they're 1-1 with a win over a team that just beat Kentucky and lost to a team that just about everybody is now. I mean, I've seen conversation about, is Texas the best team in the country? This is not just about Gonzaga being bad. This was also about Texas being incredible and going to be that good all season long. And that's a road game. Gonzaga, that's the other part of this too. Gonzaga doesn't play real road games. I think their last loss to I don't remember what the stat was.
In non-conference, to be clear. Of course,
yes,
they play
that
true
must have
road
been what it
games.
was. Right. Maybe it was their last. It was the last road game they played. There was some stat about and I don't remember what it was, but they.
Here, I'll go look. I'll go look at last season's schedule.
No. I take that back. It was an Arizona game they won. I lied. I don't know what I was getting at there, but this idea that they don't play very many true road games. They play a bunch of neutral sites for non-conference.
They played no true. Their first true road game didn't come until January 15th last year.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They played Texas Tech, Alabama, Duke, UCLA, all on a neutral site, and then Texas came to Gonzaga because it was part of the home and home.
Right. So there are a lot of reasons to sort of say this is not who Gonzaga is going to be and not freak out about this. But there are some things that need to be addressed, and it is fair to wonder if those things are going to be addressed. I'm not going to change my Final Four, my national championship prediction after 3 games. I am concerned though, because I think we both sort of had the same realization of there is something we missed where we were so confident about this Gonzaga team.
And there's one more thing we missed. You were right. December 14th, 2019 was the last time they played a true road game in non-conference. They played 3 that year, actually. They played back-to-back games on the road against Pac-12 teams. Both were top 25 teams at the time. Washington and Arizona beat both of them.
Oh, yeah.
How about that? I'm sure that Washington team was a top 25 team that ended up going like 6-24 or something.
That might have been the Washington team that beat Baylor.
Could have been. That was the Isaiah Stewart, Jaden McDaniels team that was 5-13 in the Pac-12. Yep.
I think that was. I think they beat Baylor in Alaska, and that was Baylor's only loss. I think I might have had that all messed up, but
the other question I have for you, and I think the thing that the first thing I'll ask is what are the 3 things that all national champions have?
Guard play.
Yeah, keep going. They have guard play, but there's also something else that pretty much every national champion has at this point.
The top 20-ish defense.
Yeah. There's one more. There's one thing I'm looking for here that this team doesn't have that the last 2 teams did. Gonzaga specifically.
This team doesn't.
Kansas had one. Baylor had them. This team doesn't have something that I'm upset with myself for missing.
Oh, so the last national championship teams had it, but this one.
But Gonzaga had them the last 2 years too. But the national championship teams have them.
Veteran guards.
I mean, sure, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'll give you one more guess, and I'll tell you.
Multiple wings?
Undisputable NBA talent.
Oh.
And specifically, lottery picks. Last year, Chet Holmgren. 2 years ago, Jalen Suggs and Corey Kispert. Last year's Kansas team. Agbaji.
Yeah, Agbaji. Mm-hmm.
And Christian Brown was in the conversation too.
Yep. And I would argue neither of those guys were undisputed NBA talents. Now, Agbaji would have gotten drafted before that season. I would argue both those guys got to that point during the season, though, that the conversation changed based on what they did.
Sure. But
to your
none
point,
of the guys on this roster, none of these guys on this roster have. I mean, it's not like anybody has gotten clearly that much better than they were last year, and maybe at some point they will.
Right.
But as of right now, there's not an NBA lottery pick on this Gonzaga roster, right? That's why Timmy is back. Because if Timmy was going to be a lottery pick, Timmy would have left.
Julian Strother's the best NBA prospect on this team.
Right. And Strother hasn't exactly been the blow me away guy that I was kind of hoping he would be early on. Maybe he gets there, but that's the other thing. And then when you talk about, right, the national champions and this conversation, who is right? It was Agbaji, it was all of those guards, but specifically, I mean, Davion Mitchell was the one that was a lottery pick.
Yep.
At this point, national champions have lottery picks, almost all of them, or at least guys that are. I mean, and even like the Villanova team, like Jalen Brunson wasn't the lottery pick, but there were guys that were, right, like Mikal Bridges and
Dante.
And Dante DiVincenzo. Was he a lottery pick? He wasn't a lottery pick.
No,
right?
he
was
like
17th or something.
I just
like
had to
17th
get it in
or
there.
something.
Yeah, no, he wasn't a lottery pick.
So that's the other thing that I think we missed. That I think we assumed that there was going to be at least some sort of NBA, like certified NBA talent on this roster, and right now it's not obvious who that is. That's the other big thing that I think that we missed in preseason.
Yeah, that's very fair. I just was operating under an assumption that Julian Strother was going to be taken, 13th overall in this draft.
Right. And which is why I said we because we didn't even consider that conversation. At least I didn't. Right. And I think that was an oversight on our part to just assume that was going to happen. Right.
Sure.
Because Strother was not that last year. Right. So
no.
It was going to take a step forward for Strother. And I think we were confident he was going to do it. And maybe he still will. This isn't necessarily about me. But going into the last season, and it was very clear very quickly that Jalen Suggs was an NBA talent. And Corey Kispert, you were pretty confident was going to be an NBA talent. Remember when that Philip Petrusev was supposed to be on that basketball team? Unbelievable. Sorry, I digress. I was looking at the rosters for this exact point. I was like, oh my gosh, right, that guy was supposed to be on the 2020 team too. That's the only other thing about Gonzaga, and the thing I'll be watching for, and maybe the reason that they're not, at least early, as good as the last couple teams.
Yeah, and it was very clear from the very beginning, Ochai Agbaji was just that dude last season.
Yeah.
Right, where even if you were, I think that was part of the narrative of, okay, he's coming back, he's clearly going to be the guy. He was going to get drafted because he clearly has the NBA skill set, but can he get himself into this lottery conversation and go be the best player on one of the best teams in the country and really demonstrate what he can do as a scorer, as opposed to just a 3-and-D wing, show that sort of development, that next step offensively. And it became very clear very quickly he was ready for that challenge, which is the difference for me at this point, and why this is a major red flag is Julian Strother has not looked like that. Now, he doesn't have to be the dude because Drew Timme is the dude. But from an offensive standpoint, from an NBA draft standpoint, he doesn't look much different than he did last season, and that is a major problem when Chet Holmgren is no longer there. That's I had not thought about it in that context before, but that is a very astute observation.
That's all I got. You got anything else? We've been here for 68 minutes. We should probably leave. People are tired.
Yeah,
probably tired of hearing about our voice.
Houston is just taking people's souls. That's the only thing I want to throw out there. I mean, these games just aren't close.
No. Nope.
They are something else.
Trivia time. What's the most points Houston's allowed this year?
62. Oh, am I way off?
You're not way off, but it's significantly less.
54?
55.
Okay.
And the opponents have only surpassed 50 once. Like St. Joseph's was the only team to surpass 50. It's going to be a while before we really get to see them play a truly good basketball. They play Oregon on Saturday, I believe. Sunday, maybe. It's at Oregon, so that's a test. At least I think it's at Oregon. The ESPN thing has an @@ symbol next to it. I'm assuming it's actually, yes, it is at Matthew Knight Arena. But other than, they play Alabama early in December. They play Virginia in the middle of December. They might be that team that at the end of the year they're like, I haven't played anybody, and I don't know off the top of my head what event they're playing in. If they're playing in a Thanksgiving event, but anyways, your point. Yes, they have given nobody any opportunity to even think that they might be able to win the game.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing, give me all your TCU stock right now. If you want to go out, I'm just talking generally, not just to you, but I will happily take all of that at an incredibly low price. Okay. I'm not budging.
All righty.
All right. That team was not fully intact. Give it some time. Now, this is certainly not an ideal start. I mean, they've just been bad. I'm not giving up hope. I will probably concede Mike Miles
too. They were up by 12 in that game.
I'll probably concede the Mike Miles All-American candidacy. That's not happening. But from a TCU being what I think they can be, I'm not backing down. That was the other thing.
All right. Fair enough. Real quick before we get out of here, some quality college basketball in the next few days before we see you again. Mm-hmm. Xavier and Indiana at the Cintas Center on Friday. Virginia and Baylor on Friday. That's from T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. The late game of that event is Illinois and UCLA, so that one will be fun. Those games are on Friday.
And Villanova, Michigan State.
Oh, right. Neither of those teams are ranked right now, so they aren't on the top 25 page. So I apologize. To be honest with you, I just kind of go down the top 25 page.
Oh, no, that's fair.
So I apologize to both Villanova and Michigan State for my actions. Only one top 25 team in action on Saturday. But then on Sunday, we got some good games there. Kentucky and Gonzaga, of course, the headliner, and then Houston and Oregon to kind of wrap up the week before we come and talk to you again at the beginning of next week. So some basketball to watch this weekend. You got anything else before we get out of here?
I have said all of my things.
You have said all of your things. I've said all of mine. I sure hope I've managed to do that in 71 minutes. Thank you for still being here. If you are still here, we appreciate you. Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod, YouTube, TikTok, all of those fun things. Jays for Days Pod, pretty much everywhere. If you just type that in your search bar, it's going to come up. And if you would check those things out, likes, comments, subscribes, follows, we'd appreciate all of those things. And we'll be back on Monday. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.